Hello my dear friends, and welcome back to another video. We are just 2 days away from Andor episode 11 and 9 days away from the big finale. Time really does fly when you're enjoying a Star Wars show that's like no other and provides everything you want in a Disney Plus series. And I know from what I've seen in the wider fandom, other YouTubers, other YouTube videos, the comment section, that sort of thing, that fans really do love it. And a lot of people believe that Andor should be the template going forward. So over the last 10 weeks, if you've been following, I've done a preview ahead of each and every episode. But this week's a bit different, guys, because for the first time in season 1, we have very little idea about what to expect going into the penultimate episode. All we can go off is what the season's been building up to, what we can speculate on, but also the final shots and frames in the TV spots and trailers that we've not seen in the show yet. Now recently, Tony Gilroy told Rolling Stone that the final line spoken in episode 12, which is next week's episode, not this upcoming one, is going to wrap up the season perfectly and prepare us for what to expect in season 2. But what about episode 11? No more jibber jabber, guys, let's dive straight into it and let's all jump on the hype train. So as I say, there are a few scenes from the trailers that we haven't seen in the show yet, but 3 specifically stand out as the most important. Let's start with the uprising on Ferrix. Ever since Dedra replaced Blevin in the Morlana sector, the Empire's really cracked down on the planet and the Imperials have a very tight grip. In their search for Cassian, Dedra suggested they might use torture on Maarva as a last resort, but I really don't want to see the poor woman being harmed. But then again, this show is not afraid to get gruesome. I mean, just think back to those mortifying screams by Bix. Those torture scenes were haunting. I don't want to see that with Andor's mum. But the damage to Bix, and to some extent Salmon Pack, has already been done, and the townsfolk are not happy. In the trailer we see Pack's son being a part of the uprising, and I believe this is a revolt in response to the fact that Pack, Salmon Pack, is probably about to be hung. Dedra needed Bix alive, but she gave permission to Tigo to hang Pack. Now this is not going to sit well with the locals, and might be the final straw. I can imagine Pack's son Wilman leading the charge against those stormtroopers, but we also have some other interesting characters on Ferrix at the same time. Vel clearly goes back, and this is probably to see Cinta, but maybe also to fulfill her deal with Luthen and Clea to hunt down Cassian, who she assumes might have returned. Now we also know Syril Karn is on Ferrix, either because Dedra's called him in, or he wants to take suspicions and justice into his own hands. Now away from Ferrix, we also see a space battle between Luthen and the Empire. Luthen's ship is being run by Kyber, and what's been dubbed on social media as the lightsaber ship, the Fondor, is going to come into play against the TIE Fighters. Now I reckon this is going to be the climax of the Anto Kreegyr versus the Empire story. And speaking of which, my dear friends, the trailer does show Luthen returning to Segra Milo to once again speak with Saw Gerrera and the Partisans. It's when he says, "Call it what you will," and Saw responds, "Let's call it war." Now while the scene does look very similar to the end of episode 8, which it is sometimes mistaken for, this meeting is very different. Tensions are a lot higher, there is a lot of hostility, and I reckon Luthen is there to warn Saw about the Empire, given what happened to Anto Kreegyr's men. Luthen might try to convince Saw once again to join a wider rebel cell, but the problem is, Saw doesn't see things that way. He's very stubborn and he believes he's the only rebel with clarity. Now Luthen, at the end of episode 10 One Way Out, was very happy to sacrifice Kreegyr and his men, but the issue that Saw and his men now face is that when the Empire interrogates Kreegyr's men, they might give them intel about Segra Milo and Saw's hideout. Moving on, another major scene from the trailer is Dedra and her team with a hologram map of Ferrix. The hotel, which is seen on the right, is very important, but they might be planning how to deal with the riots, which is why we later see the Imperial Army ready to face off against civilians. Now moving away from the trailers, we have the inevitable question of how Cassian and Melshi are getting off Narkina 5. I can see the show taking one of 2 routes in the 2-part finale. Either we don't see it explained and we just see them once they're off Narkina, or a good chunk of the next 2 episodes are going to be the escape, and that's going to be a mission in and of itself. Now as I pointed out in my full episode breakdown, there is a bit of concept art that's not been used in the show yet, where Andor is escaping in a shattered A-Wing. Maybe along with Melshi, their only hope is hijacking ships wherever they can find them. This will not be easy though, because the Empire does have a patrol unit searching for escaped prisoners. We see this very briefly at the end of episode 10. Not to mention that Narkina 5 does not have a forgiving climate, but anything is better than that prison, and of course we know that Cassian and Melshi make it to Rogue One, obviously. So let's talk about Andy Serkis' character Kino Loy, probably the most spoken about Star Wars character over this last week. The question of Kino has arisen time and time again. Did he survive? Well, I think, as Tony Gilroy hinted, that he's not dead. He might come into play in the second season, but for now, I'm gonna make the assumption that somehow he made it. Gilroy did not sound as though he had plans to kill him off. He even questioned why fans think he's dead, and I'm going with this until we see otherwise. So in my mind, Kino Loy is alive and well. And so the final major character we've not spoken about is Mon Mothma. Her story both with the Imperial Senate and her charity event with the secret funding is no doubt going to come to a head in this finale. Canonically in the timeline, she won't leave the Senate until season 2, but there are some major things to consider. If we do see the charity event in the final 2 episodes, this means we might see some more of Palpatine's closest confidants, notably Sly Moore and Masamida, who were both name dropped earlier in the show, and she did mention that Masamida the Grand Vizier has been watching her, and while I doubt we're going to see Palpatine himself, if tensions are mounting between Mon Mothma and one of the Emperor's closest, the season might finish her story arc with a dangerous level of suspicion for both Mon and her life. I also think that themes of family are going to continue in this one, and I wonder if despite Mon's reluctance, Leader Mothma, her daughter, will be forced to marry Davos' golden son. Now the only reason I propose this is because it's something I can imagine Perrin having a big say in. And let's be real about this guy, he's an absolute tit, as we would say here in the southwest of England. So not long to go until episode 11, we've not been let down so far, we're always in for a whole host of surprises. And so now, my dear Meglorians, let's talk about some Star Wars news. Lucasfilm President Kathleen Kennedy has teased the High Republic's live-action debut. Now we know the Acolyte is taking place at the end of the era, but with all of the publishing and the comics, a lot of us suspected the High Republic is the future of Star Wars in live-action, particularly when it comes to the movies, or at least some of them. Now personally, I've not been too engaged with this era, but I do think it's worth giving the live-action stuff a chance, because like many things, on-screen adaptations can often mark a turning of the tide. So let's see what the Direct said. In this article they say they got their hands on the Art of Star Wars: The High Republic, and within it, the era's eventual depiction outside of publishing was teased. The book says that normally it's the other way around. They start with TV shows and movies, and those become books as well as comics. But this time they're starting with the books and comics, and then they're planning games, TV shows, and also big screen movies. So the future of Star Wars cinema might be this era. Not all of them, as I say, but some of them. In reference to the on-screen future for the High Republic, Kathleen Kennedy said, quote, "It all starts with the word," and Michael Siglain, I think that's how you pronounce it, the Lucasfilm Publishing creative director, noted that he wanted to, quote, "have their own corner of the galaxy with this era," but it does seem that the High Republic is here to stay. Share your thoughts in the comments down below, guys, of this, and also Andor episode 11. Are you excited for the last 2 episodes of the show? If you enjoyed this video, guys, please be sure to give me a big fat thumbs up, subscribe if you're new, and if you want more videos not found here on YouTube, while also helping to support the channel, then click the link down there in the description. But until the next one, my dear friends, may the Force be with you always.